The elevator doors opened, and I saw Hazel sitting on the floor outside my apartment with her shoes in her hands and tears running down her face. It was almost midnight, and the hallway was completely silent except for her quiet breathing. When she looked up at me, she forced a small smile, like she was embarrassed to be seen that way. That image stayed in my head for a long time. At that point, Hazel and I had already known each other for several months. I cared about her deeply, although part of me still felt confused around her sometimes. She could make a room feel warm and heavy at the same time. Some days, she looked like the loneliest person in the world. Other days, she looked impossible to understand. That night, she told me she did not want to go home because she had another fight with her family. I unlocked my apartment quietly and let her inside. She walked directly toward the kitchen window while wrapping her arms around herself. Outside, Chicago looked cold and distant under the streetlights. I made tea while she stayed silent for several minutes. Then she finally spoke. She said her mother accused her of wasting her life again. According to Hazel, her family never believed in her dreams or respected her decisions. She explained that her older sister was successful and married, while she was still trying to build something meaningful for herself. At the time, I felt sorry for her. Now, when I remember those nights, I realize something important. Manipulative people rarely begin with obvious control. They begin by creating emotional closeness. They share pain carefully and make you feel chosen, trusted, and emotionally needed. Hazel was extremely good at that. I first met her 7 months earlier at a bookstore cafe near my office. She sat beside the window wearing headphones while staring at a laptop covered in travel stickers. After struggling with her charger for several minutes, she finally asked if I could help her. That small moment changed my entire year. She thanked me warmly afterward and asked if I came there often. Her voice sounded soft and relaxed, and she laughed easily during conversations. Some people naturally know how to make others feel interesting. Hazel had that ability without even trying, or maybe she was trying from the beginning. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Sometimes we planned it. Sometimes it happened unexpectedly. She told me she wanted to become a travel content creator one day because she felt trapped in her current life. She spoke about freedom constantly. Freedom from pressure, judgment, expectations, and emotional exhaustion. When lonely people finally meet someone who understands their emotional language, attachment happens quickly. We do not only fall in love with a person, sometimes we fall in love with the feeling of being emotionally important to someone. That was exactly what happened to me. Hazel made ordinary moments feel personal. She remembered small details about me that nobody else noticed. She knew how I liked my coffee and which songs helped me relax after stressful workdays. Some nights she sent voice messages before I slept because she knew I hated silence inside my apartment. Those little things slowly became part of my life. I was 30 years old and worked remotely as a customer support specialist for a software company. My life was predictable before Hazel entered it. I answered emails all day, exercised occasionally, visited my mother on weekends, and spent most evenings alone. Then Hazel arrived, and suddenly my quiet life felt emotionally alive. But there were moments that confused me too. Sometimes she disappeared for hours after emotional conversations. Sometimes her stories changed slightly without explanation. Other times, she spoke about serious financial struggles while posting photos from expensive restaurants with friends. Whenever I noticed these contradictions, I blamed myself. Overthinking. Emotionally attached people often ignore small discomforts because they are afraid of losing emotional connection. The mind creates excuses when the heart already feels dependent. One rainy evening, Hazel called me crying while I was finishing work. She explained that she needed money for an online certification course because her father refused to help her again. She sounded humiliated while describing the argument. I could hear pain in her voice, and I immediately offered support. Later that night, she hugged me tightly outside the train station and thanked me repeatedly. That moment affected me more than it should have. After that, helping her became normal without me realizing it. Some weeks it was transportation money, other weeks it was anxiety medication, rent stress, or damaged equipment for her content projects. The amounts were never extremely large. They always sounded understandable. Looking back now, I think that was intentional. Manipulation becomes difficult to recognize when it arrives slowly and emotionally. People become suspicious of large lies, but small emotional requests often feel harmless.
By the time patterns appear clearly, emotional attachment is already strong.
Still, Hazel was not cold all the time. That was what made everything more confusing. Some nights she sat beside me on the couch and spoke honestly about her fears. She admitted she sometimes felt jealous of people with stable lives and healthy families. Other nights, she could while singing softly to old music in my kitchen. During those moments, she felt genuine and emotionally open. That was why leaving her never felt simple. One Friday evening, Hazel invited me to a rooftop gathering with some of her friends downtown. It was the first time I saw her around people from her social life. She looked different there, more confident, more expressive. She laughed loudly, ordered expensive drinks, and moved through conversations effortlessly. Meanwhile, I stood quietly near the wall holding a glass I barely touched. At one point, I overheard one of her friends teasing her about how easily she convinced people to help her. Everyone laughed, including Hazel. When she noticed me looking toward them, her smile faded for a second before she walked over and wrapped her arm around mine affectionately. Something about that moment stayed uncomfortable inside me. Later that night, Hazel left her phone beside me while dancing with her friends. The screen lit up briefly from a message preview. It was from someone named Alexander. The message said, "You should be careful with him." A second message appeared moments later. "He sounds more serious than the others." My stomach tightened immediately. Across the rooftop, Hazel stood under golden lights with a drink in her hand and a smile on her face. For the first time since meeting her, I felt something dangerous enter my mind. Doubt. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. I barely slept after seeing those messages on Hazel's phone. My mind kept replaying them while morning light slowly entered the apartment through the blinds. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation. Another part already understood the truth was probably worse than I imagined. Hazel woke up around 9 and smiled. When she saw me sitting quietly near the kitchen counter, she walked toward me slowly and wrapped her arms around my neck, like nothing was wrong. For a few seconds, I almost forgot everything again. That was the confusing thing about her. Hazel could make tension disappear with simple affection. A smile, a soft touch, or a gentle voice often changed the emotional atmosphere completely. Some manipulative people understand emotional timing better than honest people do. She noticed my distant expression almost immediately. Then she asked if I was okay. I wanted to mention the messages right there, but fear stopped me. Not fear of conflict. Fear of hearing an answer that would destroy whatever remained between us. So instead, I stayed quiet. Later that afternoon, Hazel asked if I could help her buy a professional camera for content creation. She explained that it was her chance to finally grow her online career seriously while she spoke excitedly. I remembered Alexander's message again. He sounds more serious than the others. The sentence repeated in my head constantly. For the first time since meeting her, I did not respond immediately. I simply asked why she suddenly needed such an expensive camera if things were already difficult financially. The change in her expression was small, but noticeable. She became defensive almost instantly. She asked why I suddenly sounded suspicious and cold. Then she reminded me how unsupported she already felt by everyone in her life. Somehow the conversation slowly changed until I became the guilty person. Instead of the confused one, that moment disturbed me deeply afterward. Emotionally manipulative people often redirect conversations away from accountability. Instead of answering difficult questions directly, they create guilt, emotional pressure, or confusion. Eventually, the other person becomes more focused on repairing the emotional tension than understanding the original issue. And somehow, that strategy often works. A few days later, Hazel arrived at my apartment carrying groceries and wearing one of my oversized hoodies. She looked relaxed and beautiful in a way that immediately softened my thoughts again. While cooking dinner, she played old songs from her phone and danced around the kitchen playfully. Watching her felt painfully normal. That night, she rested her head against my chest while describing places she wanted us to visit together. One day, she talked about small cafes in Italy, beaches in Greece, and apartments overlooking rainy streets in London. Listening to her felt comforting and dangerous at the same time. I started realizing something difficult. The problem was no longer understanding her behavior. The problem was that I loved her anyway. Love becomes emotionally dangerous when someone begins accepting pain in exchange for connection. The heart slowly starts negotiating with behavior it would normally reject. Small lies become misunderstandings. Manipulation becomes emotional damage caused by stress. We adjust reality to protect attachment. I think I spent months doing exactly that. Around 3 a.m, Hazel fell asleep beside me while watching videos on her phone. A few minutes later, the screen lit up repeatedly from incoming messages. At first, I ignored them. Then another notification appeared, and another. Finally, I looked. The messages were from Alexander again. Did you tell him about Miami yet? You cannot keep doing this forever. I almost feel bad for him now. My chest tightened painfully. I opened the conversation slowly while trying to control my breathing. There were months of messages between them. Some were casual. Others made my stomach sink completely. Hazel joked about how emotionally easy I was to influence because I hated seeing her upset. She even described me as predictable because I always tried fixing her problems. But one message affected me more than everything else. Alexander asked why she still stayed with me. Hazel replied, "Because he makes me feel safe." I stared at those words for a very long time. That was the first moment I truly understood her emotionally. Hazel was not manipulating me because she enjoyed cruelty. She was emotionally dependent on comfort, attention, and security. She used people because she was terrified of instability inside herself. But understanding someone's pain does not erase the damage they create. I sat alone in the kitchen until sunrise while memories replayed endlessly in my head. Her late-night voice messages, the way she held my hand during stressful days, the way she looked at me when she wanted comfort. I began questioning which moments were real. That confusion hurts more than anger sometimes. Betrayal becomes emotionally exhausting when good memories no longer feel trustworthy. The mind starts revisiting every emotional moment, searching for honesty, When Hazel woke up later that morning, she noticed my expression immediately. At first, she denied everything. Then she cried. Then she blamed her difficult childhood and unstable relationships. Then she admitted something quietly. She said she never planned to fall in love with me. The apartment became completely silent after that. For the first time since meeting Hazel, I saw fear in her eyes instead of control. And strangely, that scared me even more. The apartment felt strangely cold after Hazel admitted she had fallen in love with me. Morning light filled the kitchen quietly while neither of us spoke. She sat across from me with red eyes and trembling hands, waiting for some kind of reaction. But I no longer knew what I felt. Part of me still wanted to hold her and believe everything could improve. Another part felt emotionally exhausted in a way I had never experienced before. Loving someone dishonest changes the way your mind reacts to affection. Even sincere emotions begin feeling dangerous after enough lies. Hazel finally broke the silence by asking if I hated her. I told her no. And that answer surprised both of us. I did not hate Hazel. In fact, that was part of the problem. Hate would have made leaving easier. Instead, I understood her too well. I understood the insecurity behind her manipulation. I understood her fear of abandonment, her need for emotional control, and her constant hunger for reassurance. But understanding pain and accepting mistreatment are not the same thing. Over the following weeks, Hazel changed in ways I had never seen before. She stopped asking me for money completely. She found a stable job at a clothing store downtown and even started paying for our dinners. Sometimes, she became calmer, quieter, and more emotionally honest during conversations. At first, I wanted to believe this was the beginning of something healthier. But trust does not return the moment behavior improves. Emotional damage stays inside ordinary moments long after apologies end. Once suspicion enters a relationship deeply enough, even peaceful days begin carrying hidden tension that was happening to me constantly. Sometimes Hazel would look at her phone and my chest immediately tightened. Other times she arrived late somewhere, and my mind automatically imagined another lie. I hated becoming that version of myself, but I could not stop it. Pain changes emotional instincts quietly. One evening, Hazel invited me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant beside the river. She looked nervous from the moment we sat down. She kept fixing her sleeves repeatedly and barely touched her food. Then she finally looked at me carefully and said she wanted us to get married. One day, for a second, everything around me became silent. Months earlier, hearing those words would have made me happier than anything else in my life. I had imagined a future with her many times already. I imagined traveling together, building a home together, and eventually introducing her proudly as my wife. But something inside me had changed permanently. I looked at Hazel sitting across from me and realized I no longer felt emotionally safe with her. I still loved parts of her deeply, but love alone was no longer enough to silence doubt. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. People often believe relationships fail because love disappears. Sometimes love remains completely alive while trust slowly dies underneath it. And once trust collapses deeply enough, the relationship begins feeling emotionally unstable, no matter how strong the feelings still are. I explained this to Hazel as gently as possible. I told her she had become important to me in ways she probably never understood. But I also admitted that I no longer recognized which memories between us were fully honest and which ones were emotionally calculated. I said I did not want to spend years questioning every difficult conversation or wondering whether future tears were real. Hazel began crying quietly before I even finished speaking. Then she asked if I believed people could truly change. I told her yes, but I also told her something else. Sometimes people change after damaging the relationship beyond repair. That sentence seemed to break something inside her. She looked down at the table for several minutes before speaking again. Then she admitted the most painful truth I had heard from her since we met. She said she spent so much time manipulating love that she did not recognize real love until she was about to lose it. Neither of us spoke much during the drive home afterward. A few days later, we ended the relationship quietly. There was no screaming, no dramatic fight, and no revenge, just sadness. Deep, exhausting sadness between two people who cared about each other at the wrong stage of emotional maturity. The months after our breakup felt strange at first. I missed her voice constantly. I missed her random late-night messages and the way she filled silence inside my life. But slowly, something else began replacing the loneliness. Peace. I stopped feeling emotionally responsible for another person's chaos. I stopped checking my phone with anxiety. I stopped wondering whether kindness was being appreciated or used. And for the first time in a long while, I felt emotionally stable again. About 6 months later, I saw Hazel unexpectedly outside a cafe downtown. She looked different immediately, simpler, more grounded. There was less performance in her behavior and more calmness in her expression. We talked for a few minutes about work and life. She told me she had started therapy and was rebuilding her relationship with her family, honestly this time, instead of using emotional stories to gain sympathy. Before leaving, she looked at me quietly and smiled with visible sadness in her eyes. Then she said something I still think about sometimes. She said, "You were the first person who cared about me enough to stop believing my lies." I watched her walk away through the crowded sidewalk while cold wind moved across the street, and deep down, I realized something painful but important. Sometimes people become genuine only after they lose the person who loved them sincerely. If this story touched your heart, remember that real love cannot survive without trust. Like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional English stories that help you improve your listening and understanding naturally